Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today we have a hand from a $3,500 buy-in World Poker Tour event, and we get Ace-King. That is a great hand. You're going to want to raise Ace-King in pretty much all situations when they fold to you. We're playing 400, 800 with what looks to be about a 50 big blind effective stack. It's kind of tough to say because I didn't list all the stacks, and of course, all the stacks are irrelevant. In general, I like to make it a little bit bigger as there are more players yet to act with deep stacks. But if everyone yet to act has shallow stacks, you can usually make it a little bit smaller just because one of the main benefits of making it big is you want to be able to play for your whole stack if you get a very good hand. And if you min raise, you may find that you have a much more difficult time doing that because pots grow exponentially in no limit hold'em and pot limit games. So anyway, I make it 2.5 big blinds in this spot, and I think that's perfectly fine. Let's see what happens. We have an overly splashy, loose aggressive player in the big blind. That is good. That's who you want to be against. Those are the players who will typically make pretty big errors for a lot of chips. Flop comes Ace King 6. And the opponent leads for 2,500. So what are people typically leading on Ace King 6? 3 diamonds. Well, in my mind, they're either leading with some sort of marginal made hand, like Ace 9, just because they don't know what they're doing and they want to protect their hand in their minds. Although in reality, they're probably just going to get called by good draws and when they're beat. Or he's leading with some sort of a draw. And clearly there are a lot of draws. Any Queen of Diamonds, any Jack of Diamonds. 10 of Diamonds and weaker is kind of garbage. So I don't think he's going to lead too much of that. So the question here is, can I play for all of the chips immediately? Like, let's say I do raise to 6,500 and the opponent jams. Am I going to call? Well, against an overly splashy, loose, aggressive player, yes. You may think, oh, but I could be against the flush, and you could be. Sometimes you're going to lose, but even then, in this scenario, we either have the best made hand or the best draw. That said, we only have 4 outs to our draw, but that is still something that is valuable, right? So I think I like raising in this scenario just because we do have the best hand a lot in my mind, because most people don't lead with flushes unless they're really, really weak flushes, because they want to protect those, kind of like they want to protect their Ace 9. So knowing I have the best hand almost every time we want to raise, the question is how much should we make it? And I think we need to make it about 6,500 or 7,000. That's going to give the opponent some room to jam. Min raising could also be pretty sweet. I don't min raise very often, but from time to time against overly loose, splashy players, it may make sense. Because if we make it 7,000 and he's sitting here with Ace 9, he may just fold. But if he has... if he's facing a min raise, then he may decide to just stick around for one more card, and then, who knows what happens if he has Ace 9 and one more card comes, right? We're going to be in great shape. So, depending on what you think about the opponent's range, you can either raise bigger or raise smaller. If you think his range is mostly draw heavy, you would much prefer to raise bigger, because if you min raise then, you're just pricing the opponent in, right? He has to put in 2,500 to win 15,000, and clearly, any diamond is going to realize that much equity. So, I like raising, probably to about 6,500, I think. I made it 5,000, a pure min raise this time. One other time I'm min raising is when I think I have a bit of an aggressive dynamic with my opponent. If, for example, this player is going to view this min raise as very, very weak or very, find out where I am happy. I'm not sure how to say those words. Basically, if he thinks I'm raising to find out where I stand, it may result in him jamming a lot of draws. And again, a lot of people think, oh man, I don't want to get it in against the draws because those are going to win 40% of the time. But you have to realize, all of this money that's going in the pot, we win it 60% of the time. So we lose 40% to the draws, we're going to win about 60%. Maybe a little bit more because we have outs whenever they get there. So if we're just both putting in, let's say, 50,000 chips, the pot's 100,000. I put in 50, but I'm getting back 60, so we're making 10,000 chips on that exchange. And that's pretty good. You're very, very happy to make 10,000 chips at 400, 800 on average. Now, of course, sometimes you're going to lose, but that's okay. You're going to lose sometimes when you play poker. So our opponent just called, which is fine. He probably has some sort of marginal made hand or draw, like I said. Now he leads 5,000 again. I don't really know what to make of this. So he led for about half pot on the flop. Now he's leading for about third pot. It's a very, very bizarre line. I would just, again, presume that it's one portion of the range, the marginal made hands or the draws, but I can't have any way of really knowing which because we're against a hypothetical, unknown, overly splashy, loose aggressive players, something a lot of people do is they say, well, I would always lead with, let's say, flush draws, so that's what my opponent must be doing. And they just assume that must be it. But you have to realize this player does not think like you. I mean, in this scenario, I'm not leading with anything because this turn card is awful for the big blind's range, I imagine, given he should have a pretty good chunk of draws in it, and this clearly does not connect with the draws. So he really should not have much of a leading range, but, here he is, he's leading. So I typically don't narrow down ranges too much against unknown recreational players just because you can't know what they're doing. So the question is, how does Ace-King fare against a wide range of marginal made hands, draws, and a few nut hands? And it's in great shape. So now on the turn, should we raise or should we call? Again, I think you can go either way. We're starting to get stacks in at this point, to the point where it may make sense to just jam. I know jamming is big, but I think jamming probably is too big looking at it because the opponent may then fold out stuff like ace-9. If we make it something like 13,000, he may stick around with ace-9. We could also just call, though, because there is a small chance we're beat. And when we're beat, we would ideally not like to play for stacks. I don't know. It's a weird spot. Who knows what's going on? Given we don't know what's going on, the question becomes, is our hand pretty good? Is it anywhere near the top of our range? And it's not the very top of our range. Certainly we have lots of flushes, but ace-king is still pretty great here. So we're going to stick around for sure. The question is, do we raise or we call? I decided to call this time. Probably thinking that if I raise now, a lot of the hands I'm protecting against will... A lot of the hands that are very marginal, like ace-9 will fold. Those are the hands I want to keep in the pot because they're drawing nearly dead. And a lot of the hands I don't want to keep in the pot, like a flush draw, those are still going to call, and that's not really great for me. All right, river's a 3. Opponent now bets 15,500. I mean, I'm just calling here every time, I can already tell you. I don't think there's much merit in raising. The only time you can raise is if you just know for sure the opponent is somehow overvaluing a marginal made hand. But I don't think that's the line people usually take. They usually don't lead and then call a raise and then lead again on the turn and then bet again on a river. They would much prefer to check the river to induce bluffs. So this line does not really seem like it'd be a marginal made hand, but then again, of course, we don't know. But if he does have a marginal made hand and I jam, he's just going to fold, right? So that doesn't do us much good. The only time he calls my river shove is if he has a 6, ace-5, or ace-3. Although, remember, he could just have flushes here, and he's obviously never folding a flush. So I think I need to call, especially once he bets on the bigger side. If he bets something like 5,000 on the river, I'm probably going to go for value because then his river range should be much weaker. Usually when people bet tiny, or small, like this player has done to some extent, although this is a really weird line, don't think this is normal. But whenever people do use small bets on the river, often it is with a marginal made hand range. And so then the question becomes, how does ace-king do against a marginal made hand range? And it's in perfectly fine shape, right? Because we beat all the aces, we beat the oddly played kings, etc. And whenever the obvious draws do miss, your opponent may still decide to hero call you, especially if you're not all in. I think you're usually going to find that people are more inclined to make hero calls when it's for a third of their stack or half their stack. But when you start making them call off for all of their chips, they tend to tighten up a decent amount. So anyway, right here, I'm not folding. We beat too much, and we have to call. However, before we do reveal what we're against, I have no clue what we're against, by the way. You're going to find that most people who take weird lines like this are doing it almost always as either a made hand or a bluff. So I don't know which one it is, and you have no way of knowing which one it is. I mean, you can have generic player pool tendencies. This happens online a lot, where let's say, hypothetically, the $5 tournament players take this line very often as a bluff, and the $50 tournament players take this line very often with the nuts. You see that a lot. In live poker, this comes up too, where you'll have players who play very small stakes local tournaments just being weak, tight, and passive. Whereas you see the medium stakes tournament players, people who play $500 and $1,000 tournaments a lot, they're often way too loose and way too aggressive. And so it actually requires different strategies to beat these players. But in this scenario, I have no clue who I'm against. This was a World Poker Tour tournament where quite often the opponent satellited in, or maybe he also just bought into his one big tournament year. It's impossible to say. So anyway, let's call. Because we don't know what's going on, and our hand is pretty good. Sometimes that really is the end of the thought process. Our hand's good, we got to find a call. And wow, Jack 4 offsuit. I did not expect to see Jack 4 offsuit. That was pretty surprising. Clearly, he should have folded pre-flop. He should have... I mean, leading flop, I guess, is reasonable, but once I raise, he should probably just fold. Actually, never mind, I'm min-raised. The fact that I'm min-raised forces him to stick around. I don't really know why he would lead the turn. You should probably just check fold the turn, really. if I make a bet, and I would have bet. And the reason for check folding turn is because even though he does have some equity, I could easily just have the queen of diamonds, and he's dead. And I could have a flush already, he's in rough shape, etc., etc. So even though this is a reasonable looking card, the jack of diamonds, it's just not a great spot given the amount of aggression that has taken place. So I think the opponent definitely overplayed his hand, and in this situation, if I somehow saw the flop with jack of diamonds, 8 of spades, which would be reasonable, I probably just would have check called flop, maybe check raise, but check call flop, check, maybe raise turn. But as you see, at least then I'm giving myself a large chunk of fold equity. As played, the opponent's essentially ensuring I'm going to call with all of my marginal made hands, and that's quite bad for him because he loses to everything. So that's going to be it for this hand for PokerNews.com. I want to thank you all again for being here today. If you have not already, check out my little poker advice. I put out daily, well, maybe not daily, every once in a while, 1-minute videos on specific topics. Sometimes I share my family in them. Sometimes I show various casinos. Sometimes I show my downswings, upswings, etc. So check it out. You can find those on YouTube. Also on my Instagram at jcardshark, JCARDSHARK. Let me know what you think. And be sure to come back to Poker News next week for another fun poker hand.